Picture this. It's the 1986 NBA All-Star Weekend. The best players in the world are gathered in the locker room before the three-point contest. Magic Johnson is there. Dominique Wilkins is there. Some of the greatest shooters the game has ever seen. All warming up, all focused. Then Larry Bird walks in. He doesn't stretch. He doesn't warm up. He just stands at the door, looks around the room slowly, and says, "So, which one of you guys is finishing second?" Nobody laughed. Nobody said a word. And then he went out there and won it, just like he said he would. That's Larry Bird, not just a basketball player. A man who could beat you before the ball was ever tipped. A man who grew up in a small town in Indiana with nothing but a hoop, a ball, and a burning need to prove something to the world. But here's the thing. The highlights don't tell the whole story. The real Larry Bird? That's the version his teammates whispered about. The version his rivals couldn't stop thinking about long after the final buzzer. And today, for the first time, you're going to hear it. Trash talk and mind games. Now, every great player talks trash, but Larry Bird didn't just talk trash. He turned it into an art form. There's a difference between trying to get under someone's skin and knowing exactly which nerve to press. Bird always knew. Story 1. The Christmas Card. It was Christmas Day. The Indiana Pacers were in Boston to face the Celtics. Before the game, Bird walked over to Pacers forward Chuck Person, a guy who had been running his mouth about being better than Bird all season, and handed him a small envelope. Person opened it. Inside was a Christmas card. Bird smiled and said, "Merry Christmas. That's a gift from me to you tonight." Then he went out and dropped 38 points on him. Person didn't say much after the game. What could he say? Story 2. The mind game nobody talks about. Isaiah Thomas once said that Bird was the most mentally exhausting player he ever faced. Not because of his scoring, but because of his mouth. Bird never insulted you randomly. He studied you. He knew your contract situation, your relationship with your coach, whether you'd been struggling the last 5 games. And right when the moment mattered most, he'd bring it up. One game, Bird spent an entire fourth quarter quietly reminding an opponent about a missed shot from 3 weeks ago. Just calmly, conversationally, like two old friends talking. The guy went 1 for 8 in that quarter. Story 3. Getting inside Magic's head. Magic Johnson was the one player who matched Bird in every way: the talent, the winning, the hunger. But even Magic admitted it. "Before games against Boston, I couldn't sleep," Magic once said. "Not because I was nervous, because I kept thinking about what Bird was going to say to me." Bird had a habit of finding Magic during warm-ups, saying nothing, just watching him. No smile, no words, just watching. Magic said that silence was worse than anything Bird could have actually said. Story 4. The All-Star Dunk Contest. You already heard how Bird walked into that locker room and asked who was finishing second. But here's what people forget. Bird wasn't even in the contest. He just walked in, said his piece, and walked back out. The players who were actually competing? They said the atmosphere in that room changed the moment he left, like the air had been let out. That was Larry Bird's superpower. He didn't need to be on the court to own the room. Untold personal stories. Here's the thing about Larry Bird that most people never understood. The trash talk, the mind games, the ice-cold confidence. None of it came from arrogance. It came from something much quieter. Something most people never got to see. Story 1. The 5 a.m. Secret. One morning during the 1984 season, a Celtics staff member arrived at Boston Garden unusually early, just before 5 a.m. The building was dark. The cleaning crew hadn't even started yet. But inside, on the main court, there was a single light on. And there was Larry Bird, alone, shooting free throws. No music, no audience, just the sound of the ball leaving his hand, hitting the net, bouncing back. Over and over again. Kevin McHale later said it best. Larry didn't practice because he loved practice. He practiced because the idea of being unprepared absolutely terrified him. By the time his teammates arrived for the official morning shoot-around, Bird had already been there for 3 hours. Nobody knew. He never told anyone. That was exactly the way he wanted it. Story 2. The quietest winner in the room. After Game 6 of the 1986 NBA Finals, one of the greatest Celtics performances in history, the locker room exploded. Players were spraying champagne, music was blaring, everyone was hugging. Bird sat in the corner, already dressed, shoes tied, bag packed. A reporter walked over and asked how he felt. "Good," Bird said. "Now I need to figure out how to get better for next year." Then he walked out. His teammates didn't even notice he was gone until 20 minutes later. That's how Bird operated. The moment a game ended, his mind had already moved on to the next challenge. Winning wasn't the destination for him. It was just confirmation he was on the right path. Story 3. The Man Back in French Lick. Every summer, Larry Bird went home to French Lick, Indiana. Population, under 2,000 people. No entourage, no bodyguards. Just Larry. He'd sit at the same bar he'd been going to since he was young, drink a beer, and talk to people about farming, about the weather, about high school basketball. Nobody made a big deal out of it. That's just how French Lick worked. But there's one story a neighbor told that stuck with me. One afternoon, a kid from down the street, maybe 10 years old, was struggling to hit a free throw in his driveway. Bird walked over, said nothing, just stood beside him and started showing him the motion. Hand position, follow through, release point. They spent 2 hours out there together. No cameras, no press, no one ever knew it happened, until that kid grew up and told the story himself years later. That was the Larry Bird his teammates knew. The one the highlights never showed you. Rivalry and respect. Every great player needs a rival. Someone who pushes them to the edge of what they thought was possible. For Larry Bird, there were two. And they couldn't have been more different. Bird versus Magic, the rivalry that saved the NBA. It started in 1979, college championship game. Larry Bird's Indiana State against Magic Johnson's Michigan State. Two kids, two entirely different worlds. One court. Magic's team won that night, but something began that would define both of their careers for the next decade. When they both entered the NBA the following year, the rivalry followed them. Celtics versus Lakers, East versus West, Bird versus Magic. Every time these two teams met, it felt like the entire sport was holding its breath. Magic once admitted, "I woke up every morning of the season, and the first thing I thought about was Larry Bird. Not my teammates, not the schedule. Bird." But here's the part most people don't know. In 1985, they filmed a commercial together. It was the first time they'd ever actually spent real time together off the court. Just the two of them, talking between takes. Magic said something shifted that day. "I realized he was just like me, obsessed with winning, lonely at the top, carrying everything on his shoulders and never letting anyone see it." They went from rivals to, quietly, privately, something close to brothers. Bird versus Isaiah Thomas, respect that never came easy. Isaiah Thomas never made it easy. In 1987, Thomas made comments suggesting Bird was overrated, and hinted that Bird's reputation would be different if he weren't white. Bird didn't call a press conference. He didn't post anything. He didn't say a word. He just showed up to the next game and scored 47 points. Detroit Pistons players said the locker room was silent after that game. Nobody wanted to bring up what Thomas had said. And Bird? He never mentioned it again. Not once. Not to the press, not to teammates, not in interviews years later. Because for Larry Bird, the court was always the only place that mattered. Words were just noise. The scoreboard was the answer. Defining moment/legacy. If you had to pick one single moment that captured everything Larry Bird was, the instincts, the intelligence, the will to win, most players who were there will point to the same play. Game 5, 1987. Eastern Conference Finals. Boston Celtics versus Detroit Pistons. 1 second left on the clock. Pistons leading by 1. Inbounding the ball under their own basket. All Detroit needed to do was get the ball in cleanly, and the Celtics' season was over. Isaiah Thomas caught the inbound pass, but Bird had read it before it even left his hands. He darted in, tipped the ball, spun, and fired a pass to Dennis Johnson cutting to the basket. Layup. Good. Celtics win. The entire play took less than 2 seconds. Dennis Johnson stood there with his mouth open. The Boston crowd lost their minds. And the Pistons, including Isaiah Thomas, just stared at the floor. Johnson said it best afterward. Harry wasn't the fastest guy on the court. He wasn't the most athletic. But he saw something the rest of us didn't even know was coming. That's not physical. That's something else entirely. That play became a symbol, not just of Bird's career, but of what made him different from everyone else. Kevin McHale once said, "He didn't play basketball. He solved it." Every possession was a puzzle, and he always found the answer before anyone else knew there was a question. Scottie Pippen, who faced Bird multiple times, said watching him changed how Pippen thought about the game entirely. It wasn't about who was faster or stronger. It was about who understood the game at a deeper level. Bird retired in 1992 with 3 championships, 3 MVP awards, and a legacy that redefined what a small forward could be. Not through highlight dunks, not through raw athleticism, but through something no one could teach, no one could guard, and no one who played against him ever forgot. Emotional/human side. Behind every legend, there's a wound that never fully heals. For Larry Bird, that wound came early. When Bird was still a teenager, his father, Joe Bird, took his own life. Larry never talked about it publicly, not in press conferences, not in interviews, not in his autobiography. It was a door he kept permanently closed. But his teammates noticed something. Before the biggest games of his career, Bird would sometimes sit alone in the locker room for a long time, perfectly still, staring at nothing. Nobody dared to interrupt him. Nobody knew what he was thinking. Some of them believed, in those quiet moments, he was carrying something much heavier than a basketball game. The body that refused to quit. By the late 1980s, Larry Bird was playing on borrowed time. A chronic back condition had gotten so severe that some mornings he couldn't bend down to tie his own shoes. Team doctors told him privately that most players in his condition would have already retired. Bird kept playing. Kevin McHale said, "We had no idea how much pain he was in. He never showed it, never complained, just came in every day and did the work. It wasn't until years after retirement that Bird finally opened up about how much he had been suffering through those final seasons. So the next time you watch a Larry Bird highlight, the trash talk, the clutch shots, the ice-cold stare, remember what was underneath it all. A kid from French Lick, Indiana, carrying loss, carrying pain, carrying an entire city on a back that should have given out years earlier. And still, somehow, making it look effortless. That's not just basketball greatness. That's something much more human than that. If you want to see more stories like this, players revealing what legends were really like behind the scenes, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Who should we cover next?